Well, thank you very much indeed, Costa, for that very warm welcome. And could I say something which I suggest I'd be saying on behalf of all Australians, that what a great man Costa is, and his Gardening Australia and his activities around this country to push the importance of soil and the environment have been second to none. Let's give him a round of applause for doing just that. It's a pleasure to be with you all this morning, and indeed I think even Donald Trump and Hillary Clinton would be pleased with a gathering of this size, so well done to you all for being here. I'd like to acknowledge the major sponsors of the conference, the Victorian Department of Environment, Land, Water and Planning, the Federal Department of Agriculture and Water Resources and the Federal Department of Environment. And I'd also like to congratulate Landcare Victoria on their 30th anniversary. Secondly, could I recognise the traditional owners of the land on which we're on and their elders past and present. So thanks very much everyone for inviting me to speak to you today on a topic that I believe is vital for our future and in fact for planetary survival. And this is not hyperbole, this is real, and it's up to all of us to do something about it. And I speak of saving our soil to save the planet. You at Landcare Australia have been at the forefront of natural resource management for 30 years, encouraging all Australians to get together to care for our landscape. What was initiated by the late Joan Kerner and Heather Mitchell, advocated by the late Philip Toyne from the Conservational Council and Rick Farley of the National Farmers Federation, has become a remarkable organisation. Primarily funded through government, but whose aspirations have rolled out through community-owned and driven organisations involving farmers, environmentalists and urban residents. Yours is a remarkable story of service to the nation, and I congratulate you all accordingly. Now, some of you may wonder why a retired soldier and former Governor-General shares your passion for the health of our soil, the adequacy and cleanliness of our water, and the need to rejuvenate our agricultural lands in particular to enable sustainable food and fibre production. It's simply because I'm very concerned for the future well-being of our children and grandchildren, and I've got 4 and 10 of those respectively, in a global sense, and to a degree in Australia, where the declining health of our soil places at serious risk our capacity to sustainably feed, clothe, water and shelter a rapidly expanding global population, projected to increase from about 7 billion now to 9 or 10 billion by 2050. And later I will explain why I am concerned. But suffice to say at this point that the health of our soil, including the regeneration of the Australian agricultural landscape, should be seen as a responsibility for the whole population. This means that we need cooperation across all communities, including urban and rural, to have the necessary impact. And in this regard, I feel it particularly unfair to leave the sustainable management of about 60% of the total Australian landscape to 130,000 farmers without reasonable reward. We cannot expect them to carry the whole burden on behalf of 24 million urban Australians. We all need to play our part, including adequately rewarding farmers for both their product and in particular for the sustainable management of over half this continent. Most farmers are doing their best to look after their land. It's their livelihood, of course, and most feel a great affinity with it. My appointment by Julia Gillard as the National Soil Advocate, which has been continued by successive Prime Ministers, has given me opportunities over the past 3 years or so to visit large and small farms, family-run enterprises and those owned by big corporations. I've had the privilege of meeting over 4,000 farmers on their properties at conferences or at farm open days. I've witnessed much farming innovation, great passion for the land, hard work, innovative techniques and good sense. There are farmers who have changed semi-arid, non-productive sand into good agricultural land, which is producing highly nutritious grain, high-quality wool, fibre and excellent lamb. Others who have quadrupled their grazing herds using sophisticated cell grazing management techniques and so on. But as I will explain later, we still have some way to go to encourage the whole agricultural industry to adopt sustainable land management practices. Now, my core observation as the National Soil Advocate is that planetary survival is going to depend to a large extent on how we look after, in particular, the top 30 centimetres of our soil. The microbial, fungal and nutrient function of the soil requires a diversity of plant cover and appropriate movement of water through the soil, namely good hydrology. This top 30 centimetres dictates the nutrition levels in our food and how much filtered water is available for plant and animal life, including humans. Desirably, we should be concentrating on the top metre of soil to ensure vegetation resilience with increased rooting depth, able to access adequate water, especially during droughts. Now, society, as you are aware, is being encouraged to eat nutritious food to stave off diabetes and other chronic diseases, and in so doing to reduce the unaffordable over 150 billion per year health costs. But our food is often grown on struggling soil with limited water supply, and as a result contains below optimal levels of nutrients. Healthy soil, on the other hand, means healthier food, healthier animals, and healthier people. But it's very important to understand that the process of ensuring healthy soil is an integrated one, involving not just the soil, but water and plants. And the art and science of linking these three components successfully, I believe, needs nationally agreed oversight. It is obvious to me that in dealing with soil, water and plants, that you can't deal with them in isolation. Each one is dependent upon the good health of the other two, and that's something that I don't see being commonly taught or spoken about. I suggest we need a national soil policy to go something like this: to restore and maintain the health of the Australian landscape such that it's fit for purpose, fit for agriculture, fit for mining, fit for urban, fit for leisure, fit for indigenous and so on. And in an agricultural sense, to achieve sustainable triple bottom line results: environmental, financial and social. This means that in the agricultural arena, for example, and that's where I'm concentrating today, the farmer is rewarded for looking after his landscape as well as being paid a fair price for his product. So he and his family can live, pay the banks and continue to produce food and fibre for the rest of the population. From this flows the social benefit, where more families will stay on the land. The daughter or son will continue on with a farm or buy another one. The local community will prosper as there'll be more families staying in that community, more children going to the school so the school stays open, more purchases at the local stores and so on. The social benefit, ladies and gentlemen, flows on to all Australians. Having defined our policy aim, I suggest we need to have acceptance at every level of government that our soil, water and vegetation be declared key national natural strategic assets to be managed accordingly, that is, as key national assets and in an integrated way. Remember, I spoke about the importance of integration earlier. Developing this policy needs the input of all key players, not just agriculture and environment, but also mining, health, education, indigenous, trade, regional development, defence, the private sector, and importantly, the Australian public. Why should the Health Minister be involved in this particular fleshing out of the plan? Well, patently, if we're looking at reducing the health costs through a healthier soil, he or she should have her input. Why do we need the education ministers involved? Because we want to ensure that the instruction that is given to ag scientists and farmers and kids at school is the very best, and that education is coordinated throughout the country. In fact, I believe that the well-being of our soil, water and vegetation assets will increasingly underpin global social stability and security. The social implications of a lack of food and water globally will inevitably impact national economic growth, leaving many communities worldwide in dire straits. Hungry and thirsty people are not happy. They all want the best for their families, and they all want to survive. And these situations have formed the basis of many wars and border disputes throughout history. I wonder how many farmers there are still left in Syria or Libya today. I'd say it's probably in the scores instead of the thousands, and that's happening through many areas of the Middle East. Indeed, the status of the world's soil and water has such great impacts on social stability that some nations now include natural resource availability in their military threat assessment process. And perhaps it's something all nation security people should think about, particularly if it leads to a greater allocation of resources to fixing and educating about the soil rather than destroying it. Now, the President of the World Bank, Jim Yong Kim, stated in 2014 that fights over water and food are going to be the most significant direct impacts of climate change in the next 5 to 10 years, and I think he's absolutely right. Let me explain why. Globally, and particularly in India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, the Middle East, Turkey, and even California, we're continuing to lose arable land, depleting our soil carbon, aquifer and groundwater supplies, polluting our rivers and compounding climate change impacts through poor soil, water and plant management. And we have been doing this as a planet since man first changed from being a hunter-gatherer to recognising that agriculture could make him a more prosperous person. Let me give you some historical examples. First, the Fertile Crescent. What was known as the Fertile Crescent is now occupied by the modern territories of Iraq, Jordan, Lebanon, Israel, Palestine, Syria, Iran and Turkey. Farming as we know it began there some 11,500 years ago. For centuries, the region was a major food producer and led the ancient world in agricultural innovation. Today, however, the productive capacity of the landscape is vastly different. Deforestation and large-scale irrigation caused widespread soil erosion and salinisation, which without appropriate soil and natural resource management turned productive fields into barren salt plains and desert. This has sobering implications for present and future management of landscapes, because I see exactly the same thing now going on in many of our other global landscapes, from aridification then to desertification, and we've really got to think this through. Today, access to water resources is further exacerbated by the construction of large dams used to control water flow. For example, since 1975, tensions between Turkey, Syria and Iraq have been high, largely due to water access. Turkey is upstream of the Tigris and Euphrates rivers, meaning its dams and hydropower infrastructure impact on the water reaching Syria, reduced by about 40%, and Iraq, reduced by about 80%. Internal conflict places further pressure on water resources. Rivers, canals, dams, sewage and desalinisation plants are military targets because control of water gives strategic control over major cities in the region, such as Baghdad. In 1980, former Iraqi leader Saddam Hussein drained the Mesopotamian marshes in southern Iraq to discourage local opposition. The UN declared this an act of ecological and cultural disaster, akin to deforestation in the Amazon forest, and has still not been restored to its former good environmental condition. Today, Iraq is facing a very uncertain political and military future at the same time as their growing population, diminishing water supply, and lack of food is creating substantial social problems. The Mekong Delta. In 2012, Vietnamese President Truong Tan Sang warned that tensions over water resources would not only threaten economic growth, but also be a source of conflict. Natural flows from the Mekong River have been disrupted by the increasing number of hydropower dams built by China in the upper Mekong, going right up into the hills of Tibet. This has caused rapid changes in water levels, reduced farmers' ability to irrigate crops, impacted fish migration to spawning grounds and other adverse effects downstream. Damming this river has impacts for countries such as Laos, Vietnam, Thailand and Cambodia, where over 60 million people rely on the river for food, water and transport. And we really need to learn from these situations and be participation in the remedying of them. And that's why I'm talking to you about it today. It's not just Australia we should be thinking about, because we're all interconnected in an environmental sense. Now, many soil problems experienced around the world also pose challenges in Australia. These include water availability and, I suggest, loss of soil carbon. Let me speak firstly about water, a topic we're all attuned to in Australia with our recurring floods and droughts. Do you know that about 50% of our annual rainfall is unnecessarily lost to evaporation because it can't penetrate the soil and therefore can't transpire? Again linked to the lack of organic carbon and vegetation coverage in the main. This evaporation is 25 times the total quantity of water in all our dams and 5 times the quantity of water in all our river. This slide gives a bit of an explanation. At the top there, 2 drops fall on the hard surfaces. In any 100 drops that fall on the landscape, 2 fall on the hard surfaces, the roofs and the roads, and run off and disappear into the sea. Another 12 end up, of which 2 are in the dams and 10 end up in the rivers. 2 drops, 2% of our rainfall ends up in the dams, and yet we're putting billions into dam construction. 36 drops end up in the vegetation and soil, and a massive 50 are disappearing straight up there because it cannot get down there. As a population, we have a lack of understanding of what Michael Kravchuk describes as the large and small water cycles. The large water cycle, can you put that next slide on, please? Next slide. That's it. The large water cycle is the exchange of water between ocean and land. That's where it's picked up from the ocean, taken across the land and generally dumps in very large quantities, and provides about 24% of our annual rainfall to the landscape. The small water cycle is a closed circulation of water in which water transpired from plants falls in the form of precipitation over the same terrestrial environment, sometimes from the leaves to the ground over only a few centimetres. It provides, or used to provide, about 76% of the global landscape's rainfall. The small water cycle can only function effectively on land provided we have adequate ground cover, sufficient organic carbon in the soil and reduced runoff. So we've really got to think through how we re-engage this small water cycle. It can be re-established with appropriate restorative landscape management and has proven successful even in the semi-arid areas of Australia. In a very simplistic way, if you grow more diverse vegetation and have year-round ground cover, this will increase the amount of transpiration in that immediate area, water leaving the plants through the leaves and going into the atmosphere. And as a result, that region will create a small water cycle as rainfall or heavy dew. Now, the small water cycle or concept is not new. It was written about in previous millennia, and I'd like to share some of Aristotle's words that are relevant today. Now, the sun, moving as it does, sets up processes of change and becoming and decay. And by its agency, the finest and sweetest water is every day carried up and is dissolved into vapour and rises to the upper region, where it is condensed again by the cold and so returns to the earth. What an incredible statement made several thousand years ago by that wonderful man. May I now address a few remarks to another key element of a healthy soil, and that's soil carbon. It's imperative that we work to improve soil carbon levels both for the future health of the soil and also to take advantage of the ability of the soil to hold a great deal of carbon as soil organic matter. If more carbon can be drawn down from the atmosphere, it may prove advantageous in reducing the impact of climate change, as soil can hold more carbon than the atmosphere and vegetation combined. So how do we get the carbon into the soil? Well, plants capture atmospheric carbon, carbon dioxide, combine it with water in the presence of sunlight to produce carbohydrate, glucose, and release oxygen through the fundamental life process called photosynthesis. The carbohydrate is then stored or used in the plant, and of course is what we eat either directly or indirectly for example, beef or lamb. This is also the way the plant contributes to the health of the soil. Carbohydrate, carbon, hydrogen and oxygen moves through the plant to be stored in the roots, with some carbon travelling into soil microaggregates. Organic matter from the breakdown of plants, animal manures and residues contains this same carbon, which also becomes incorporated into the soil. Now, it's estimated that about 150 to 200 billion tonnes of soil organic matter has been lost from planetary soil over the past century. However, with the implementation of regenerative landscape management practices, it's been suggested that soil organic matter might be restored to pre-industrial agricultural levels within 50 years. And we need to test this philosophy over the long term, and I'll talk about that later. This is good to know, as our national and global soil carbon levels have been depleted, in some cases severely. This carbon content is usually derived from organic matter and is indeed a key indicator of soil health, structure, and the soil's ability to hold water. It's the carbon content of soil that governs its capacity to absorb, retain, and supply moisture and to sustain active plant growth. I'm told that a gram of soil organic carbon can facilitate the retention of up to 8 grams of water in the soil. And of course, the vice versa applies. Soil organic matter is especially important in sandy soils, where it helps to retain moisture, and in loamy and clay soils it improves soil structure, which contributes to better water filtration and retention. Soil carbon helps support a healthy balance of nutrients, minerals, and soil microbial and fungal ecology, and also patently improves fertility. It is these constituents that ensure healthy soils, and it's the healthy soil that promotes vigorous plant growth, producing good nutritious food and high quality fibre. Unfortunately, across the Australian dry cropping area and grazing sector, most actively farmed soils have carbon content of 1.5% or less. Yet to deliver its myriad of benefits, I'm told that soil carbon levels should be somewhere around 3 to 5%. A key requirement is finding the means to measure soil carbon levels quickly, accurately and cheaply across broad acreage. Some form of satellite system linked to ground sensors with an appropriate algorithm looks promising and should receive, in my view, the very highest research priority. If we fix the policy to restore and maintain the health of the Australian landscape such that it's fit for purpose, and governments agree to declare our soil, water and vegetation to be national natural strategic assets to be managed accordingly and in an integrated way, I suggest we've also got to do something concurrent with that in fixing the paddock. Right now, although a lot of good work is being undertaken by land care groups, natural resource management organisations, our farmers and soil scientists, much of our soil and water resources remain at risk. So what's the broad situation? Australian soil, as you know, is mostly very old, strongly weathered, shallow and relatively infertile by world standards. Around 60% of our arable land in the southern half of the continent is degraded in some way, and I'm not criticising farmers or anybody else, it's the way things have happened. Some of it, though, is serious degradation through wind and water erosion, feral animals, aridification, acidification, significant loss of soil organic carbon, structural decline and loss of nutrients, overgrazing, although that's now decreasing, and probably an excessive use of chemicals, pesticides and herbicides, all of which need to be tested. The State of the Environment Report 2011 notes that of our 39 soil types, only 4 now have sufficient levels of carbon needed to hold water and support adequate microbial and fungal faction in the soil. Rates of soil erosion by wind and water across much of Australia continue to greatly exceed soil formation, which is about 0.01 of a millimetre per year. And although we are improving this situation through better ground cover measures, again, as a country, I believe we've got a long way to go. Salinity is still a major problem in parts of the country, although many areas have overcome this with appropriate planting of perennials and trees. A big one is the erosion and excision of about 1 million kilometres of our streams and rivers in affecting water flows, irrigation systems, fish and otherwise. I do a lot of travelling through the country, driving through it, and I would suggest to you that if I see driving through our agricultural landscapes more than one stream in 20 actually flowing correctly that has not been excised, then I'm very surprised. So we've got a lot to do there. The kidneys or filters of any river system, our wetlands, have been too often drained for farming and urbanisation purposes. And urban growth in larger cities are taking up good agricultural land, acting as urban hotspots and negatively influencing our climate. Climate change, I suggest, is bringing about more erratic and unreliable rainfall, bigger floods, extreme temperatures, longer droughts and hotter wildfires. Do you know that the Arctic Circle is on fire? Eastern Siberia and Western Alaska, right on fire because the permafrost is releasing the methane, and lightning is causing these huge fires right across. And the same is true in India. India burns more and puts more carbon up through fires up there than just about the rest of the world's CO2 emissions. Here's what Henry Bolte said when he was Premier of this state many years ago. We couldn't have made a bigger mess of the soil of the country if its destruction had been carried out under supervision. Now, he highlighted the problem in this state, which then encouraged some sensible and timely approaches to soil conservation. Today, we continue to make improvements in the land and natural resource management areas, including in agricultural land management, through practising no-till sowing, pasture cropping, rotational grazing and cropping, reduced clearing and burning of stubble. But we've got to move faster, and we've got to do it in a more coordinated way to be effective long term. It's important to remember that whatever we plan to do for the overall Australian environment, it must go hand in hand with agriculture as an important export industry, as an employer either directly or indirectly of around 1.6 million people, and because agriculture, as I mentioned earlier, utilises around 60% of our continental landscape. When the 68th United Nations General Assembly declared 2015 to be the International Year of the Soils, they did so with the realisation of the need to do something now about our global landscapes. The timing is right for Australia to take the lead on sustainable soil management through the export of knowledge in particular. I would suggest that even if we doubled our food production, that is, if every paddock magically was able to double its quantity, we'd only feed 60 million people. If we export knowledge, we might help to feed 1 billion people. Knowledge that you can either sell or you can give away as a global good. Further, oh, that's good, thanks. Further, just last December, the French Agricultural Minister launched the 4/1000 initiative, Soils for Food Security and Climate, which has set a very ambitious target for the agricultural sector to increase and protect carbon stocks in soils. Other leaders have also recognised the importance of healthy soil, and this is what Franklin Roosevelt said. The history of every nation is eventually written in the way in which it cares for its soil, and the nation that destroys its soil destroys itself. That should be up in every school classroom in the country, in print that big. In summary, Australia and large areas of the planet are facing a troubled future if sustained and coordinated efforts are not quickly made to restore and maintain the health of our landscapes. Apart from missing a key opportunity to adapt to climate change, it will mean an inability to sustainably feed the projected 9 to 10 billion global population by 2050. Whilst our finite water supplies, in particular in aquifers that are established over geological time, will continue to diminish and in some cases disappear altogether. And this is the problem for India, China, Sub-Saharan Africa, Middle East and California. They've been drawing so much of their agriculture water for irrigation from finite aquifers. This scenario is a recipe for international insecurity. Here in Australia, we do have many farmers who are already implementing innovative and more holistic farming practices to achieve an economic, environmental and social benefit. We also have organisations, research bodies and universities looking at solutions to our degraded landscapes. But we have to move faster and in a more coordinated fashion. Let me briefly explain before I finish what I'm trying to do about agricultural landscape repair, not me, my team and myself. The Soils for Life organisation, and the website is there, of which I'm chairman, is a small not-for-profit registered environmental organisation with the principal purpose of providing leadership to foster and facilitate the wider adoption of regenerative landscape management. We started with 21 best practice agricultural field study sites across the country. We were limited to that funding, and we are currently hoping to roll out to 100 sites over the next 3 years. We're also rolling out a proven mentoring program of one farmer teaching another farmer, and that has been extraordinarily successful. The overall objective is to establish a long-term soil, water, agricultural research base based on working farms who are already doing good things, where we can consistently measure triple bottom line performance and make this information readily available to other farmers, the soil science community, governments, the public and private sectors. An important component of this process is the need to reconnect urban Australia with its rural roots, to ensure that people know where their food and fibre comes from and the vital importance of healthy soil to sustain future generations. Now, one way we can do this, and I think it's a very good way, immediately and economically, is through the establishment of a garden in every primary and junior high school in the country, but with a nationally agreed integrated syllabus. In other words, I see an integrated syllabus agreed right through the states and territories, where a kid goes from 5 to 16 improving his or her knowledge about how the soil, water, photosynthesis, food, nutrition, etc. develops. It's not just about how you plant the carrot and how you chop it up later and eat it. It's much, much more informed than that. And I've been working indeed with Costa, with Stephanie Alexander Group, Gardening Australia, the education ministers, and indeed the ACT government has now agreed that they'll take the lead on this. We've got 6 schools that are going to do the hack work with the education, and perhaps we'll be able to get that particular philosophy through the whole of the political system, because I think if we got a good school garden in every primary and junior high school, that would change public opinion faster than almost anything else. Now, we can also encourage community gardens and greater community participation in the various land care activities. We can implement processes that may be very old and largely forgotten, but still provide useful techniques for dealing with our ancient land. An example of this is the yeoman's plough, in support of the Green Army in planting trees in hard country. The plough digs down deep. It does a deep rip, but it doesn't turn the soil over. It just loosens the soil, breaks the compaction. So when the plant is trees, the roots go down, the water goes down 2 feet or thereabouts, and you get a much higher take-up rate of the trees. We also need to stocktake our soil, water, agricultural knowledge base, establish the consequent scientific shortfalls, and then refocus our research priorities accordingly. And I think the key one is broadacre soil carbon measurement. Also important, how are we going to reduce inorganic nitrogen leaching? What's the atmosphere consist of? 98% or 6% nitrogen, and we still haven't worked out a way of grabbing that nitrogen, sticking it in the ground. Now that surely should be a research priority. There's also an imperative to look at the regulations governing our landscapes to ensure that good work is not inhibited by regulatory overburden. Well, it's time to conclude, but if I can put just several questions to you. Does it make sense to have a national objective to restore and maintain the health of the Australian landscape so that it's fit for purpose? Does it make sense to recognise that the 3 key ingredients of a healthy landscape, our soil, water and plants, should be declared key national strategic assets so it's lifted in the public and the policy minds, to be worked into in integration in that process? Does it make sense to better reward or incentivise our 130,000 farmers, not just for their product, but as primary carers of 60% of the landscape on behalf of we 24 million urban Australians? Does it make sense to reconnect urban Australia to its rural roots? And is a garden in every school properly orchestrated with properly programmed, is that a good start? Does it make sense to stocktake our knowledge base in soil, water, agriculture, find out our deficiencies in knowledge and refocus our science priorities accordingly? Does it make sense to look at our regulatory bill and deal with overburden? And finally, does it make sense to set up some sort of long-term pragmatic research base based on existing farms where it's properly sorted out and where we get a continuum of knowledge of soil, carbon, nutritional values, water, over not just 10 or 20 or 30 years, but 100 years? I think it does. In concluding, ladies and gentlemen, can I just say that a healthy soil is vital for sustainable life and it impacts all society. Indeed, if you eat, you should be involved. I've provided some thoughts on how we might both fix the policy and fix the paddock, but in a nutshell, I still say, to save the planet, we've got to save the soil. Thanks very much for your attention.